Christina, welcome to the Easy Conversations podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I'm looking forward to our conversation today. I believe it's a topic that we tend not to pay a lot of attention to, but I think it's needed. And there are implications around people's mental health with respect to diet and how some people internalize it and some of the diet choices they make, hoping for quick fixes. And often that can lead to other unintended consequences. But before we jump into that discussion, I do want to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself and share with the listeners a little bit about yourself and what kind of work you're doing, what's brought you.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be, and I think you're right. Discussion about all of that. Little background about me. I'm a licensed psychologist and have a private practice, but I also have a podcast where I talk about what you brought up and more. So the reason I got into this list, I went a long time, years with my own eating disorder, my own struggles. And
Mhm.
back when I was going through it, there was not information really about eating disorders at all. I think there were some after school specials
Mhm.
and all I and that was about it. I didn't know I had an eating disorder. I just thought I failed at
Mhm.
dieting. And so I just kept trying to find the next best one or one that I could do better. So I think that's where I'm coming from is I think there's a lot of people out there because to your point, we don't talk about it. We realize how sick they are.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so I actually didn't want to do specialize in eating disorders, but I realized if I
Yeah.
had perhaps somebody in my treatment team along the way that had the lived experience like that, it might have helped me to feel more normal or help me to feel like I could trust my
Mhm.
providers because they get it. Because when you have an eating disorder,
Mhm.
it's for anyone who has one who's listening, the thought patterns and the behaviors and the way you live your life is so different than anyone's. And I decided I want to be that provider that I never had because I think you need to instill hope. The
Yeah.
myth out there that you can't fully recover was so out in my head. Oh, I'm always going to have to suffer with this. Really contributed to
Mhm.
me not ever reaching before I blipped out of treatment. But then to experience actual full recovery and going, oh, wait, I heard that wasn't. I think that needs to be said loud and clear to everybody because having the mindset of, oh, wait, I actually can fully recover, that really helps people like continue on in treatment and move forward and know that they can. So that's really the big reason why I do it too, is to help people
Mhm.
get into treatment, realize they can life without all these struggles. That's why I'm here.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. And I think it's such an important point that you brought up because often when we feel like we're struggling with something, it's hard to find that hope and make that connection that I can recover. And then often you get stuck in that trap or you just get stuck in general. And then that alone can be very debilitating. And you're just on this hamster wheel trying to keep up and you never feel like you can. Now, just to understand further, did you specialize in this after going through your own experience? And it sounds like the idea was so you can be a source of information and hope because you didn't have that yourself.
Interesting. So I want to be a psychologist. So
Yeah.
I knew that much, but I always said I'm never going to touch eating disorders with a 10-foot pole because I didn't want to play into the
Yeah.
myth of, oh, everybody who's a psychologist or a therapist, they bring their own stuff into the room and they make it about themselves. I'm like, nope, not going to play into that. Going to happen. I'm going to just everything else but that. Well, what I ended up finding was I remember this one session, this person came in with an intake, and for depression, we assess appetite. It either sometimes increases or decreases. And I was asking somebody about
Mm-hmm.
that. And they said something, and I went, that's like an ed thought, which eating disorder thought. That's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And I inquired about it, and they looked at me. There's this look of, oh my gosh, you get it. And I was like, okay. I know if it would have been another clinician who hadn't had that experience, they would have gone on and just diagnosed
Mm-hmm.
them with major depression, which would have been fine because a lot of times that's comorbid. However, that was not
Right.
the main reason why that person was in my office. They were having a full blown eating disorder. They were
Mm-hmm.
struggling with completely missed. It just,
Mm-hmm.
and I remember that person saying, "You finally get it." It was just this moment of clarity. She should.
Yeah, and I think that's again a very interesting thought there because I've also become a therapist, and I would say it's more of a
Mhm.
second career. So my first career was in engineering, but there's something to be said about that because going through certain life experiences, not even, it doesn't always have to be the same as the clients, but just understanding that we go through life and there are challenges and we make certain choices and decisions that impact us in different ways. I'm able to relate. And on the other side, all the client really needs is to be seen, heard, and understood. And if you can't relate or make that connection, it's hard for the client to then build that rapport with the therapist, because then the mindset a lot of the times for people, or for a lot of the times people avoid going for therapy too, is that they may not be understood. But then the mindset also is that this person just has all the answers, whereas as therapists we're also figuring it out. We're not any experts, or we haven't perfected anything. We're also walking this life, or through this life, and trying to understand things as they come. So that is something that, you highlighted. Just having that experience yourself, you were able to connect with the client's experience and what they might have been going through.
The therapist is the clinical skills, but then there's this human factors skill that isn't between the patient and the therapist that I think we don't talk about enough. That it is so important to have, whether
Mhm.
therapy really clicks or it doesn't.
Yeah, and on the side of eating disorders, it's very interesting because as I was learning about eating disorders myself, I was looking at some of the symptoms, and I don't think we've already touched on the fact that this doesn't get talked about much, but the symptoms can be very subtle. And you may just think, oh, this is just normal. But I started looking at certain things. I'm like, okay, maybe I have certain tendencies as well around eating disorders where, for example, there were times where I would binge. And for no other reason, I was just like, oh, I'm just hungry. And I would justify it as in, I worked out a lot today, or I deserve a cheat day. My mind would give me reasons to justify it. And then when I would step back and have that higher resolution view of it, I'd be like, no, I should still be eating the same amount, like irrespective of the situation. Like, why am I justifying it? So it allowed me to question some of the choices I was making. But I don't think many people appreciate that. And to your point, a lot of the times you may just be going on autopilot and making certain choices and not know that you might be struggling with this disorder, for example. And it doesn't have to be extreme or debilitating. It could still be happening in the background, and we just tend to live life as it is and not think about it too much. What are your thoughts with respect to that?
Yeah, I get that question a lot. Do I have an eating disorder? I don't even know. It seems like we live,
Mm-hmm.
well, first of all, we live in a toxic diet culture, and um, this belief that if you're in a small, especially for women, if you're in a smaller, thin body, then you have more value, you have more worth, you're more attractive, you're healthier, right? Like physically healthy. There
Mm-hmm.
is that belief if you're in a larger body, you must not be physical body, you must be. And I'd be hard pressed to find people that maybe haven't done some work that believe otherwise. Like health, you can be healthy or not healthy. That's not determinant of health. But certainly we're seeing that now with these weight loss drugs coming out, like health at all costs, like, or thinness at the cost of health, even like these weight loss drugs for people who do diabetes. They're called weight loss drugs. They're actually for diabetes, but they're being prescribed to people in larger bodies saying, oh, you must be unhealthy. Let's put you in a smaller body. But it's actually causing people to be problems coming along with that. When you live in a world like that,
Mm-hmm.
it's confusing. It's, wait a minute. If I'm in a body that doesn't look
Yeah.
like the ideal that's set out there by the media, I must be doing something wrong. Because if people can look like that, it's possible. So if my body doesn't look like that, what am I doing wrong? Right. Um, and so
Mm-hmm.
there's this almost desperation for people like, I need to do something to look like that because otherwise I'll be seen as
Mm-hmm.
whatever. And
Yeah.
certainly the messages of medical doctors, like on the BMI scale, which is that's complete crap, but or other people
Yeah.
like say, "Oh, I'm just so worried for your health. You shouldn't be eating this, or you should
Mm-hmm.
eat this." There's so many mixed messages, right? And it gets very confusing.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think what a one of the things I've come to realize is that even if you feel like you look a certain way, you might not
Hmm.
feel good,
Yeah.
right? So that could be often a good gauge around, okay, am I healthy? Do I feel healthy? just because I look a certain way, I've been able to achieve the body type that is appealing or gets celebrated or glorified on social media or online, but I don't feel good. So that can often be a good indicator of some of the choices you're making. The other piece you got into was that toxic diet culture. And how do people navigate that? Because it's so pervasive, and with social media, it's in your face, right? If you don't meet certain criteria, then you internalize this shame, or you have this internal dialogue that may not be good for you.
Yeah, and I think that the difference is the extent to which it impacts your life, certainly. So when somebody has an eating
Mhm.
disorder, I'll ask them, like, how much of your day is spent thinking about food, your body, exercise, like how much what you want, what you didn't eat, like all of it. And say, oh my gosh, all day long. Like I can't even imagine 80%. That's a big clue. If you're spending that much a think with your mind occupied with, that's something to really think about, because people who don't have eating disorders, they might still have that somewhere, but it's not all consuming. It also doesn't rule their life. So for someone who has an eating disorder, their day is revolving around rituals. So say like for I'll give an example. When I had mine, my life was like revolving around it. Like I would skip sleep to get up to go to the
Mhm.
gym, and I had to do that. If I didn't, I was do like negotiating with it. I called it like, okay, can I eat now? What am I going to eat? I earned my food or didn't earn my food. It would set the whole mood for the day. If I didn't work out until I went and did a certain number of cardio minutes, and at that I had to be a cardio, and then I had to do a certain number of types of weights every if I didn't meet my rule I had in my head. And I would miss out on social events with friends because I didn't was going to be there. I was afraid I'd
Mm.
eaten for the day already, or watching number on I'd weigh myself several times a day, and if the number went up even 0.2 pounds stated, and I had to punish myself. If it went down, I was in the best mood ever. Like everything was revolving around weight and exercise and what I ate
Mhm.
and didn't eat. And everybody's got their own rules. Like my rules were
Yeah.
everybody else's, whatever rules they are, they're taken from the messages you get in society at the time. So you're
Mhm.
trying to latch onto something to make sense of how do I look like that, thinking that look that's going to
Mm.
happiness in this life. I often hear once I look like that or lose the weight, I'll be no, it has nothing to do with that, because to your point, once you actually if you actually reach that goal or look like that, I hear this so much. Oh my gosh, wait, I'm happy. Be 5 more pounds. How
Mm.
come I didn't? Because
Yeah.
that's actually tell yourself. And I think for other people who don't have eating disorders, their happiness is not dependent on reaching this goal or looking a certain way. They still live their life. They go out, they enjoy happy hour, they enjoy holidays. They don't fear them. They don't have panic attacks about, oh my gosh, what am I going to, Christmas dinner or cake, or people or
Mhm.
don't think all day long about, gosh, I can't wait to go home and sit in front of the TV and have all my binge foods, or and then feel guilty. I do that again.
Yeah, for sure. And I think you touched on the idea of exercise, and I've experienced this from time to time where if I miss a workout, then I'll
Mhm.
feel guilty. And again, I have to sit with that and explore. And it's okay. Why am I feeling guilty? What's the message I'm giving myself? Is it, do I feel lazy? Do I feel like I didn't burn those calories? So there's that, again, that internal messaging that comes up. And a workout should be like, okay, it is something I do. And maybe if I miss one a week because other things came up or I was just feeling tired or exhausted, I should listen to my body. What was like that for you, like the internal messaging, if you were to mix a cardio day or scheduled workout and you couldn't make it work?
Back then, this is really interesting. I had one of my best friends from when I was in my eating disorder days and didn't know on my past years later when I was in recovery. She goes, gosh, it used to be so
Mhm.
horrible to like want to plan a weekend with you, because we just used to know if she doesn't feel it in like a workout, it's she's gonna be in a bad mood, or can go for all of us and go
Yeah.
run. I remember them asking me that, hey, we're gonna be camping. Are you gonna be okay without the gym? And like it never registered in my head back else, right? But yeah, that's how it was. I would figure out some way to do some. I got the in, or if I didn't, it would just gosh, I didn't work out today. Oh my god, it was horrible. It was
Yeah. So then how do you find a balance? Because I think it's still important and we should hold ourselves accountable. Say if exercise is a priority for us, we should still hold ourselves accountable and obviously it is good for us too. Where do you draw that line? How do you find that right balance? And when I ask that, I mean in general, like whether it's, helping your clients with that or even for yourself, how have you been able to find that balance where if you miss it, it's okay, but then you're holding yourself accountable to go out and do it?
Well, first, I had to sit with myself and realize my whole identity was like, I'm an athlete, right? So in high school, I did sports
Yeah.
year round. And then when I got out of high school, I was
Mhm.
doing marathons and triathlons. So everyone's like, oh my gosh, you're so fit. You're so motivating. And I thought, gosh, if I have to keep this up too, right? I was so proud of myself. And I had to realize, I don't know where society started to tie exercise and food, really two separate things. But you hear
Mhm.
this exercise more and eat less. And that right there, we need to challenge. Like, that's bulimia, right? Because
Mhm.
my thought was, if I eat, it's sitting on me waiting until I go burn it off. I actually did not
Mhm.
realize it was like this light bulb moment of, wait a minute, actually, the second I eat, my body starts using everything to keep me alive. The food goes somewhere and it's
Right.
used, and my body's happy. I don't know. If I go burn it off, I got to eat more to replenish it. Like, it was a novel concept of, wait a minute, what? How was that? I just thought food was like the devil. It was like, eat, I'm gaining weight. And if I'm not, or I'm
Mm.
losing, that's great. Like, I did not have this concept that food was fuel and nutrition. We warped. When I look now and I think, gosh, I missed several workouts in that sense of, I don't go every day. I don't look at
Mhm.
it as missing. I look at listening to my body, like what feels good, right? Maybe today my dogs, maybe I won't. Or
Mhm.
like, I do other things because my body feels like I have a sitting job, right? So I feel like I want to get up and stretch and move, but not because I want to lose weight, not because if I want to look in the mirror.
Mhm.
It's, I want to feel good in my body. I think about when I'm like
Mhm.
80 and be able to have balance and not fall and break my hip, or be able to carry my groceries in from the car. I think about like that,
Yeah.
or I think about like my heart health and my lung capacity, and I start thinking about like the actual reasons for movement. I don't want even call it exercise anymore. It's like,
Mhm.
why am I doing it? I'm doing it because it serves a purpose for my body, so I don't get stiff. I have balance, right? I maintain some muscle so I can function in the world. Or if I get invited, to Disneyland with my, I can walk all day and not be like, oh, end of the day, because you're
Mhm.
walking a lot, right? It's those kinds of things
Yeah.
that go in my mind now. It's the eating disorder days where it's, oh my gosh, I have to fit it in. How many calories did I burn? Did it?
So what I'm hearing then is essentially it's the intention is different, right? Whereas before it was to look a certain way, now it's to feel a certain way. And that's a huge distinction between a healthy way of looking at it and then where often it can fall into that, whether it's eating disorder or just some of the other forms of challenges that we can experience when we associate so much emphasis on exercise for the wrong reasons. Now, you talked about being told that, hey, you look great. And that's interesting too, because often sometimes, when I'm talking, people ask me, what's your routine? What's your regimen? So I'll explain that. And it's easy again for society to be like, okay, you're doing it to look a certain way. And sometimes people will be like, well, you look great, right? So maybe you can take that pressure off. And I'm like, fair, but I'm not doing it to look great. I'm doing it because it is a part of my life. It allows me to maintain energy throughout the day, function and be productive. And it's just part of my lifestyle. So I'm not doing it to look a certain way, but it's easy to get caught in that where people will be like, oh, yeah, give you that compliment. So how do you then distance yourself from that compliment and not lose sight of why you're eating well or exercising to begin with?
Personal work, right? Because
Yeah.
I hear that so much. Oh, it started when
Yeah.
I just wanted to lose a few pounds for a wedding or a vacation, and it looked amazing. And it was like, right? This pleasures. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh. Like, I got positive attention. I'm doing something right. And for people maybe who were bullied or have low self esteem or the core belief, like I'm not good enough, for the first time to get that is so intoxicating, validating. And I
Hmm.
think that's the start for a lot of people, their first experience with manipulating food and dieting and equating that with happiness, pleasure, acceptance, doing something right. Oh, I want more of that. And equating, I look different and that's why I'm getting that. So maybe if I look even better or keep that, I'll keep getting that. And equating the external
Yeah.
with their value and worth. not really realize.
Point, it becomes that external validation. And one of the things I've come to realize is if you're extrinsically motivated versus being intrinsically motivated, you're likely to get exhausted or burn out because then you're constantly chasing that approval, and that can get exhausting at times. Whereas if it's intrinsically related, you're happy with whatever you're able to do for yourself, and some of those goals can be based on your own values as opposed to getting an applause or validation from others. And I think, to your point, I appreciate you mentioning that is part of the personal work that we must all do and find that within ourselves rather than seeking it external. But it is
Of
balance.
course. It's normal to say, like, I want people to give me compliments. I want to look a certain way, right? I think just
Mhm.
normalizing that and saying, yes, but to what extent are you living your life and it like becoming everything and not acknowledging other parts of yourself? Like, are you a nice person? Are you compassionate? Are you creative? Like, what other areas of your life are you not in on or giving yourself credit for and putting.
For sure. And then on the flip side, you touched on the whole idea of looking a certain way and having a smaller body frame,
Mhm.
especially for women. But then there's now this focus on body positivity. Now, I wonder, where does that go too far? Where you're like, okay, you look great as you are, but is that also encouraging people to maintain a healthy lifestyle, or it's I can let myself go because I love the way I am and I should just feel accepted the way I am? Does that put you into the other extreme where it can be unhealthy?
So I love that you asked this because I think that's playing again into the toxic diet culture body you're letting yourself go. The
Mhm.
problem with it is not everybody's meant to be in a smaller body and be physically and genetically like
Mhm.
healthy, right? I've certainly seen and
Mhm.
experienced myself like trying to put myself into a smaller body to fit in whatever BMI or
Mhm.
whatever societal standards. And I was so unhealthy. Like I was
Mhm.
literally I almost died. And I think you hear that
Yeah.
person like, oh my gosh, how did the marathon runner, this person die of a heart attack at 40? They were so quote unquote healthy. Probably
Yeah.
not. They were probably malnourished. They probably weren't eating enough. They were probably over exercised, doing all sorts of things. It's like, wow, you look great. You look so fit,
Mhm.
or they looked so great. Or on the outside, hurt people. The weight bias in our society can really hurt people on
Mhm.
both ends and create a state of unhealth regardless. So it has that's why I say it has to do with your body size. So looking
Mhm.
at somebody, you
Mhm.
can't tell A, their state of health, or B, if they have an eating disorder, at that which one. I think that's another thing we need to talk about. Like people have this idea, I'm not sick enough because I'm not immune, I'm starving myself, or oh, you must have binge
Right.
eating disorder if you're in a larger body, and you have anorexia if you're in a smaller body. And that's just
Mhm.
not the case. Atypical anorexia, where people in much larger bodies have every single same symptom of someone with a diagnosis of anorexia nervosa, that they're just in a larger body. Into the biology of that, but I
Mhm.
won't. So I think there's just a lot we need to challenge, education that needs to be had. A lot more. Appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, and so what I'm gathering from there is, irrespective of, again, it's everything we've talked about. It's not about how you look, it's about how you feel. And if, irrespective of your body type, if you're not feeling good, then you need to dig a bit deeper and understand, okay, where is this feeling coming from? What can I do
Mhm.
differently? Just because I don't fit a certain body criteria doesn't mean I'm not healthy. And it's a deeper exploration again. And a lot of it does factor back to your mental health. Like you said, just because someone's running marathons, they look great on the outside. We don't know what's going on the inside. And we're starting to understand that a lot of the times when we are constantly inducing ourselves with stress, that can have other unintended consequences to our
Mhm.
actual health, even though we may on the surface look like everything's well put together.
Mhm.
So we don't know what's going on below the hood there. So I appreciate that. Now, you touched on certain other things that are coming down the pipeline. And when you and I chatted offline, we talked about Ozempic being one such example. And now people are seeking quick fixes to
Mhm.
diet, right? Or looking a certain way. What are your thoughts around that? And do you see downsides? Because again, there a lot of these things get introduced into the market. We don't have enough research data to support whether or not we should be participating in these things. And there's always that caveat that, oh, it is doing its intended, what it's saying it will do, but then there's other things that we don't know, and the side effects that don't often get publicized or advertised for that matter.
Hours here. My first question when this started happening, when people were being prescribed these semaglutides, so these medications for people who have type 2 diabetes are given at a much lower dosage, and they help some people, right? I've never seen it where we prescribe a medication for one of the negative side effects. So if you watch like the Ozempic commercials and that guy at the end is like talking really fast, it may cause, one of those side effects is weight loss, right? It's not a good thing, most of the side effects, right? But I think it was a Desperate Housewife or something that was a podcast, that host asked, wow, what are you doing? She was already a smaller body to begin with, but then she lost even more weight. Oh, I'm taking in it, I think Ozempic. And so that became this like drug of like affluent people, because it's a very expensive drug, right? I think it's like $1,200 and have type 2 diabetes covered. Right. So now it became this like magic weight loss that people can lose weight on. And it was very coveted at that point. So then it became much more well-known for something else. Wanted it because of that. I have to think about the media again, how that started. But now it was never intended to be a weight drug, but now that's all people know it as. And so then people, and they need it at much higher dosages too. It's when you're prescribed it or take it for quote unquote weight loss, you're not taking it at the dose it's given for people with type 2 diabetes. So you have to think about that too. What's going on there? And so what was happening, I don't know if it's still happening, is there was a shortage for the people who have type 2 diabetes to be able to get their medication, because buying it like for $1,200 a month at the higher dosages. And so the shortage, which was pretty awful, right? You actually need them. What it does is it makes you, in your brain, it makes you feel like you're not hungry. So it's instilling this sense of satiation. So you're not in tune with your hunger signals. So you feel like you don't need to eat, which is a problem, because you need to eat to live, much less, right? Yeah. And so they're dropping weight, but you had a healthy pancreas. Now it's causing problems. Pancreas, there's been discussion about, is it causing thyroid cancer? Certainly people are having lots of nausea, gastritis, gastrointestinal problems. We don't know what else is to come, but we do know that when people are losing weight, they're losing muscle, which is a problem. And then they have to stay on it forever to maintain that. You can't go off, because the second you go off, you gain it all back. That too is what's going on with that. But I think the worst message is we're putting you in a smaller body. Your body was healthy to begin with. There was nothing wrong with it. We're going to give you this drug to put you in a smaller body because society says you need to be in a smaller body. And hey, now you're going to have health problems potentially. Like, why would you risk that?
Yeah. No, I agree. And I think the other piece you touched on there, and that's one of the areas of research that they don't have enough findings on, is that muscle loss and the impact that can have for us. And I think you have to question some of these things. Just because it's a trend or others are using it and it's giving you the results that you may want, you have to question, well, how are you getting there? And I'm always weary of that. And yeah, hopefully it's nothing too serious, but to your point, we're still learning a lot about what's going on with this drug. So I appreciate that. The other piece, I know we've talked about all the things we shouldn't be doing or we should be mindful of, but what are some actionable steps that people can take with respect to their physical body and maintaining a healthy frame of mind and doing the things that are going to improve their mental health when it comes to diet, rather than have a adverse effect?
This is the hard part, right? Teasing out stuff. I think it's very hard with all the influencers right now. So I'm just going to say that too. It's noisy out there. Not going to lie, right? You have all these people out touting like, this is the way to go. This is what I eat and I look like this. So First of all, I just want to say if you're looking at an influencer who's got lots and lots of followers and they're in bikinis and then what they eat in a day and you should follow this, a critical mind first of all. I think that's the first step is always question what you're looking at, who's saying what, and then ask yourself, is that even able? First of all, when it comes to food, I think just remembering that food first and foremost is fuel and nutrition. We don't plug in a cell phone, right? Like the only thing keeping us alive is food. So if you don't eat, we're screwed. You actually need to eat to stay
Yeah.
alive. And it's people don't really realize it's always shocking to me when people say, oh, I only need to eat like X number of calories. And I'm like, what? Where did you get this? To the point of like social media, right? We need to eat a lot more than I think people think they do in diet culture. So there's a lot of people out there eating far less than they need to. It's amazing when you actually eat what your body requires, like how emotionally more stable you are and like how much more energy you have and how much better you more clearly you can think. That people are afraid to do that. They think, oh, no, that's too much. It's scary to think, wait, that much, what's
Yeah.
going to happen? And I think that's a problem in and of itself. Is what do you mean what's going to happen? You're going to like the body because food
Yeah.
also helps you with your emotional stability, right? So your emotions can be more stable when you're right, when you're constantly in a state of not eating enough. It's hard to not be
Yeah.
irritable. It's hard to have stable emotions. It's hard to think really. So you might make mistakes. You might forget things, and that puts you in a worse mood, right? You forgot to where your keys are, like you're more prone to accidents, whatever it is. Certainly, if you're not sleeping enough, because this can impact your sleep. Think about if you're sleep deprived for far too long, like how that impacts you. So it's like a whole systemic thing. I've been on food too, right? Back in my day, carbs are carbs you want, right? Not
Yeah.
for people now. They're like, what are carbs? No. And so I always question that too. It's like, why are we demonizing certain, like, I always tell people, like, eat what you want to. And they look at me like, did you just tell me to binge and gain weight? I'm like, no. I said, what?
Mm-hmm.
What do you want to eat? There's so many people, and I don't know if you do this too, but they have a list of good foods, bad foods, healthy foods, unhealthy foods. It was so bad. Oh, I feel guilty. It's like if you eat off the bad, quote unquote unhealthy foods, whatever that is. And again, I've been around long enough, like this is scary to me. There's
Mm-hmm.
that emotional tie. So if you're emotionally tied to your food,
Yeah.
like I feel guilty, I feel bad, I'm bad, and I have to pay
Mm-hmm.
penance, I got to do something. Let's challenge that, right? Food.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a problem too. People go, but of course there's better foods than others. And I'm like, in what category? Like there's certain foods that taste better than other foods. There's certain foods that your body responds to better than other foods. But talking about that, I think they mean good foods is if I eat these good healthy foods, I won't gain weight foods. I'm not going to get anxious and feel bad about myself. If I eat the bad foods,
Mm-hmm.
mostly the good tasting foods in their mind or the guilt inducing foods, the scary foods. That's always interesting to me. It's like, how are you going to immediately gain
Yeah.
weight if you eat a cookie?
Yeah. What if you were to look at it? So I understand what you're saying, but there's also that idea of there's certain foods that are healthy. And so what if you looked at it more from a health perspective rather than weight?
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts with that? Because there's certain things like, for example, I try to avoid sugars because I know it doesn't feel good after eating it. So again, it's about the feeling rather than how it's going to make me look.
So this is my quick and dirty. It's not a rule. I don't like rules, but I say like
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
everybody's different. Everybody's body is different. So I'll give an example. Like
Yeah.
I love pork. I lived in Hawaii for a year. I always got invited to backyard barbecues, but I could not digest the pig. It was so upsetting to me. My stomach cramped from right. That's one criteria is like to your point. How do you feel after you eat it? Right? Emotionally after you're meet that criteria. Do you feel deprived after you're done eating it? If you do consistently, you're going to end up binging later and it's going to build up.
Right.
You also don't want to feel guilty. Look and guilty if you eat that food. Want to feel
Mm-hmm.
satisfied. You want to have a good mix of I feel satisfied, I'm enjoying what I'm eating, I don't feel deprived, guilty. So everybody's got to do their own internal work with that, but also physically. Let's say you eat, I don't know, the typical food like a quote unquote salad or something is a quote unquote healthy food, right? Okay,
Yeah.
if all you eat is salad, maybe your body's feeling physically great, but happen. you're going to end
Yeah.
up binging on other stuff you want later at some point. But to the point people are like, well, what if I'll eat is like brownies and cookies and this and that, right? Which I know that's like on the typical bad food list. Your body's eventually going to feel sluggish. You're not going to be able to think clearly,
Hmm.
start craving other things. So that's
Right.
nobody's going to just eat one certain type of food all the time when you just go, I want a variety of things.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think to your point, it's finding the right balance. Are you getting the nutrients you need, right? If you're just going to be eating brownies, then you're not getting the nutrients, even though you're getting the calories. You may not have the nutrients. So your body needs everything to fully function there. And you touched on the diet piece, and it's interesting, right? Because now, again, we're connected, so connected to everyone. We hear everyone's plans. So you've got the carnivore diet, you've got the keto diet. So again, it becomes a bit of a trend. But my view is experiment and see what feels good and what doesn't feel good. Just because someone is glorifying this diet and they said, oh, it's great, it may not work for you. So test it out and see if you actually feel good. And if you don't, then maybe it's not for you. So I think in general, people should be open and try things, but at the same time, don't get too attached to a specific diet just because it's working for someone. And again, we don't know what's going on below the surface. It's just knowing what's good for your body, and everyone's body type is different. So as you touched on as well, the again, and I would look at it the same way for different types of food, right? And we touched on it, knowing what works for you and what doesn't work, because that can be a problem too.
I think the thing is the rigidity with diets, right? Like diets aren't sustainable for life. You can't stay on one thing. Like you're going to go on vacation. Like you're going to have days
Mhm.
where you can't stay on whatever plan you're on. But there does need to be some kind of fluidity with asking yourself, like, what kind of enjoy eating? To eat does my body feel good on? And every day you're gonna have different levels of need. You're not gonna. That's why diets don't work too. Some days you're much more hungrier than
Right,
others, and like more active or less active, or your hormones are different, or your stress levels different, or whatever's going on. Right? There has to be diets just
right.
they don't work because then people get mad at themselves. Oh, I messed up today. I went over or I didn't have time 3 o'clock when I was
Hmm.
supposed to eat it. Whatever. It's that gets so
Yeah. And then again, I would say even being curious with yourself. Like I know, for example, if subconsciously, if I'm stressed, I may want to emotionally eat. But then that's a good way or opportunity for me to be curious and understand, okay, why today do I want to eat? Why do I have a sweet tooth today? Or why do I want to eat more? So it's an opportunity again to get curious and look at what's going on that's prompting this. And I think a lot of people often get caught in that too.
or people ask, what's the difference now between your life now versus before? And I say, here's the difference.
Mm.
Before, if I would go to say a movie and I had dinner before, if I ate, obviously wouldn't be hungry if I just had dinner. I would most often not
Hmm.
get something at the movie theater, right? Be like, I'm not gonna do that, right?
Yeah.
Now it's
Yeah.
weird. I don't even. It's very strange. I don't even think about food the same way at all. I just look at it like the experience of it all, like having fun with who I'm with, and the whole night is the experience. And food doesn't even like really play a part. It's like, all right, what do I want to eat? That's on the menu. I don't look at like think calculating calories or I don't. What did I eat before or what? Oh,
Yeah.
whatever is. And then I'm checking it and okay, we're going to go to the movies after. Do I want something here? Great. It's part of the experience. It's all part of it. That was a great night. I had popcorn. We did this. We had chips and salsa at the dinner, whatever. And then I go home and I don't berate myself after. Like I would go home before and be like,
Hmm.
oh my gosh, what did I just, now what am I going to do tomorrow to compensate, make up for this? And I
Yeah.
would just be spinning for the longest time. And the whole next day would be consumed with the night before. Now it's so refreshing. It's like it doesn't even it's gone. It's like it was just
Right.
part
Yeah.
of the
Yeah. What I'm hearing is there's a level of acceptance with whatever it is and being okay with it and just being more in the moment rather than getting too far ahead. And I think a lot of people, that's where that anxiety comes in because we get too caught up in worrying about the future and what have I done? Now I have to
Mhm.
fix this tomorrow. And yeah, I think it's that acceptance piece when it comes to food and being mindful of what you're putting into your body and being very intentional with it. That's ultimately, I think, at least that's what's worked for me, and everyone's different. But yeah.
Yeah. And again, there's so many layers to this, right? For anyone who's struggling, what is your struggle? Is it going out and worrying about what people are thinking about what you're eating or how you look based on what you're eating or ordering, or you just don't go and like your life becomes small? Like I said, it's so different for everybody, what in the ways they suffer, or should to get
Mhm.
into all of it. But I think the basic thing is just to remind yourself like you do need to eat.
Yeah. No, that's great. Thank you, Christina, for your time and having this conversation with me. I took a lot back, and it's given me stuff to think about. And I hope the listeners feel the same way. But if people want to get a hold of you or find some of the work you're doing, what are some ways they can do that, whether it's online or through some of your social?
Thanks for asking. This has been great. Thank you. So I have my podcast. It's on all the Apple, Amazon Music, and whatnot. And then it's the same handle on Instagram, Behind the Bite Podcast, or I think it's Behind the Bite. And then I have my private practice if anyone wants to.
Awesome. I'll put that in the show notes. But thank you again. It was a pleasure
Thank you.
talking to you today.